In the vibrant heart of Maplewood, a small town nestled within the rolling hills of the United States, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm, golden hue over the basketball court. It was late afternoon, and the sounds of laughter and the rhythmic thump of a basketball bouncing against the pavement echoed through the neighborhood. Marcus Carter, a 14-year-old boy known for his kindness and intelligence, was in his element. Wearing a worn-out blue jersey that had seen better days and a pair of scuffed sneakers, he dribbled the ball effortlessly, his movements fluid and confident. "Come on, Marcus, show us what you got," shouted his best friend, Jordan, a tall boy with an infectious smile. The group of friends surrounding the court cheered him on, their voices rising in a chorus of encouragement. Marcus grinned, feeling the energy of his friends and the community around him. He loved basketball. It was more than just a game. It was a way to connect with everyone, a chance to dream of a future where he could be a professional player, just like his idol, LeBron James. With a quick flick of his wrist, Marcus launched the ball towards the hoop. It sailed through the air, spinning gracefully before swooshing through the net. The crowd erupted into applause, and Marcus basked in the moment. His heart swelled with pride as he exchanged high fives with his friends. They were all there, Jordan, Maya, and Leo, each of them sharing in the joy of the game. "All right, who's next?" Marcus called out, panting slightly from the exertion, but invigorated by the thrill of his shot. "I'll take you on," Maya replied, stepping up with determination. She was a fierce competitor, ready to challenge Marcus with her own skills. The two began a friendly one-on-one game, their laughter intertwining with the sounds of the bouncing ball. As they played, the sun continued its descent, and the sky transformed into a canvas of pink and orange hues. But as the game continued, a few adults gathered on the sidelines, watching the kids with expressions that blended admiration and concern. Among them was Mrs. Henderson, the local librarian, who often encouraged Marcus in his studies and praised his character. "That boy has a bright future ahead of him," she said to a neighbor, nodding toward Marcus as he skillfully maneuvered around Maya, attempting another shot. "Yeah, if only he could stay out of trouble," the neighbor replied, a hint of skepticism in their tone. Mrs. Henderson frowned slightly, but chose to ignore the comment. She had seen Marcus grow up, recognized his potential, and knew the kindness that radiated from him. "He's just a kid enjoying life," she countered. But the comment lingered in the air, a whisper of suspicion that would soon take on a more ominous tone. As dusk fell and the streetlights flickered to life, Marcus and his friends wrapped up their game, their laughter still echoing in the cool evening air. "Same time tomorrow?" Jordan asked, already anticipating their next gathering. "Definitely. I'll bring some snacks," Marcus replied, his excitement palpable. The group exchanged goodbyes, and Marcus began his walk home, the weight of the day's joy still buoying his spirits. The streets were quiet as he made his way, the familiar route winding through the neighborhood. But as he turned the corner onto Maple Street, he spotted the flashing lights of a police cruiser ahead. His heart skipped a beat. Officer Thompson and his partner, Officer Jenkins, were known in the community, their presence often a source of comfort or unease, depending on the situation. "Marcus!" Officer Thompson called out, his voice cutting through the evening calm. "Can we have a word?" Marcus stopped in his tracks, a knot forming in his stomach. He recognized Officer Thompson, a man whose reputation was marred by whispers of prejudice and biased judgments. "Sure, officer," he replied cautiously, trying to maintain his composure. "Where are you coming from?" Thompson's tone was stern, and his gaze bore into Marcus, making him feel small and exposed. "Just playing basketball with my friends," Marcus answered, his voice steady despite the rising anxiety within him. "I'm on my way home now." "Basketball, huh?" Officer Jenkins chimed in, stepping closer, his expression skeptical. "You wouldn't know anything about that robbery that happened down the street earlier, would you?" Marcus's heart raced at the sudden accusation. "No, officer. I wasn't involved in any robbery. I've been playing all day." "Is that so?" Thompson asked, crossing his arms. "A bunch of kids playing ball, and you just happened to be the only one walking home from that direction?" "It wasn't me. I promise," Marcus pleaded, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I'm just a kid trying to get home." But the officers exchanged glances, their minds made up before Marcus had a chance to defend himself. "You're coming with us," Officer Jenkins said, his voice low and unyielding. "What? No, you can't do this." "I didn't do anything," Marcus exclaimed, his voice rising in panic. The world around him began to blur as everything he had known began to spiral out of control. "Stop resisting," Officer Thompson ordered, stepping forward. "You're under arrest." "Arrest? For what?" Marcus shouted, desperation clawing at his throat. "You're making a mistake." The commotion drew the attention of bystanders, and his friends, who had just reached the corner, stared in shock. "Marcus, what's happening?" Jordan cried out, his voice filled with confusion and concern. "Tell them I didn't do anything." Marcus yelled back, tears threatening to spill as he struggled against the officer's grip. "Stay back," Jenkins barked, raising his hand to keep the group at bay. "Let him go. He's innocent," Maya shouted, her voice shaking with anger. But the officers were unmoved, their biases clouding their judgment. They pulled Marcus toward the cruiser, ignoring the protests of his friends and the growing crowd. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, suffocating his spirit. He looked back at his friends, their faces a mix of fear and disbelief, and felt a deep sense of betrayal. As the officers shoved him into the back seat of the police car, Marcus's heart sank. "This isn't fair. You have to believe me," he cried, but his words fell on deaf ears. The door slammed shut, sealing him in darkness and despair. The engine roared to life, and as the cruiser pulled away, Marcus's thoughts raced. How would he explain this to his mother? What would his father say? They had always taught him to stand up for what was right, but in this moment, he felt utterly powerless. As the car drove away, the cheers of his friends faded into the distance, replaced by the overwhelming silence of the night. The weight of injustice settled heavily on his young shoulders, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a battle he never anticipated. A battle to prove his innocence in a world that seemed determined to see him as guilty. Marcus sat on the cold metal bench of the holding cell, the faint buzzing of fluorescent lights overhead adding to the oppressive atmosphere. The walls were painted a dull gray, and the air felt heavy, suffocating him with fear and uncertainty. He hugged his knees to his chest, trying to make himself smaller, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he could disappear. His heart raced as he contemplated the gravity of his situation. How had it come to this? One moment he was playing basketball with his friends, and the next he was being accused of a crime he didn't commit. The distant sounds of laughter and conversation from the outside world felt like a cruel reminder of the life he was missing. "What am I going to tell Mom?" he thought, biting his lip in distress. His mother worked long hours at the hospital, and he could only imagine the shock and heartbreak she would feel upon hearing the news. "She's going to be so worried," he muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. The thin bars of the cell felt like bars of a cage, trapping him in a nightmare. He pressed his forehead against the cool metal, wishing he could somehow reach out and grasp the reality that had been snatched away from him. Just then, the door creaked open, and a uniformed officer stepped inside, his face a mask of indifference. "Hey, Carter," the officer said, tilting his head as if Marcus were just another piece of furniture in the room. "You got a visitor." "Who?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. He hoped it was his father, David, who had always been his rock. But as the officer stepped aside, revealing a stern-looking man in a suit, Marcus felt a pang of disappointment. This man was not his father. "I'm here to ask you a few questions," the man said, his tone professional but lacking warmth. Marcus recognized him as a detective from the police department, someone he had seen on the local news. "You're being charged with robbery, and I need to know your side of the story." Marcus felt a surge of indignation. "I didn't do anything. I was playing basketball with my friends. You have to believe me." His voice cracked, and he fought back tears. The detective raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Look, kid, you were caught at the scene. Witnesses identified you. You got to give me something to work with here." "Witnesses?" Marcus echoed, disbelief washing over him. "You mean the officers who arrested me? They didn't even listen to what we were saying." The detective sighed, clearly unamused. "You don't have to make this harder on yourself. Just tell me where you were during the robbery." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but the words caught in his throat. He felt utterly helpless, trapped in a system that seemed to thrive on misunderstanding and prejudice. "I was at the court. I can call my friends. They'll tell you the truth," he pleaded, desperation seeping into his voice. The detective shook his head. "You think I have time to track down your buddies? You need to cooperate if you want any chance of getting out of here. Otherwise, you're looking at serious time." Marcus slumped back against the wall, anger and fear swirling inside him. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "I'm innocent. You have to believe me." But the detective merely shrugged, his expression hardening. "Innocent until proven guilty, kid. And right now, you're guilty in the eyes of the law." With that, the detective turned and left, the door slamming shut behind him. Marcus felt a wave of despair wash over him. He was just a boy, and yet here he was, facing the crushing weight of a system that seemed rigged against him. He closed his eyes, wishing he could think of a way out, wishing he could feel safe again. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, David Carter was sitting in his office, poring over case files when his phone rang. The shrill sound jolted him from his concentration. He glanced at the screen, recognizing the name of a friend from the local bar association. "Tom? What's going on?" he answered, his voice steady but laced with concern. "David, it's Marcus. He's been arrested," Tom said, urgency lacing his words. "They think he was involved in that robbery last night." David felt his heart drop. "What? That's impossible." Marcus wouldn't. I know. But the officers are saying they have witnesses who identified him. You need to get down to the station now. He's in a holding cell." "Thanks, Tom. I'll be there," David replied, already rising from his chair. His mind raced as he grabbed his jacket, a mix of fear and anger coursing through him. His son, a boy filled with kindness and potential, had become a target for prejudice in a world that often mistook innocence for guilt. As he rushed to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a case of mistaken identity. It was a reflection of the deep-rooted issues that plagued their community. David arrived at the police station, his heart pounding in his chest. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as he pushed through the heavy door, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of Marcus. The atmosphere was tense, with officers moving about, their expressions a mix of authority and boredom. "Excuse me," David said to the receptionist, who barely looked up from her computer. "I'm here to see my son, Marcus Carter." The receptionist eyed him with mild annoyance. "You'll have to wait. He's in processing right now. No visitors allowed." "Processing?" David echoed, his voice rising in disbelief. "Are you kidding me? He's just a kid. You can't keep him in there." His frustration bubbled over, and he took a step closer to the counter. "Sir, I can't help you if you don't calm down," the receptionist replied coolly. "You need to wait for the detective in charge of the case." Just then, a familiar voice broke through the tension. "David," it was Tom, rushing into the station. "I'm here to help. Let's see what we can do." David turned to his friend, feeling slightly reassured. "They won't let me see him. They're treating him like a criminal when he's innocent." Tom nodded, his expression serious. "I know it's hard, but we need to stay calm. Let's find the detective and get some answers." Together, they moved through the station, David's heart racing as he glanced at the closed doors of the holding cells. He imagined Marcus sitting alone, scared and confused, and it broke his heart. "This isn't right," he muttered, anger boiling inside him. After what felt like an eternity, a detective emerged from a back office. "Carter," he called out, glancing at David and Tom. David stepped forward, determination etched on his face. "I'm David Carter. I'm Marcus's father. I need to see my son." The detective regarded him with a mix of annoyance and indifference. "He's being held for questioning. We're gathering evidence, and I can't just let anyone in there." "You have no evidence," David shot back, his voice rising. "My son was playing basketball when this happened. You're making a huge mistake." The detective narrowed his eyes. "Look, Mr. Carter, I understand your concern, but we have witnesses who saw him at the scene. Until we sort this out, he's not going anywhere." "Witnesses?" David scoffed, incredulous. "What did they see? You're just going to take their word for it? My son deserves a fair chance." The detective crossed his arms, unimpressed. This isn't a discussion. You can hire a lawyer if you want, but right now, we're doing our job. David felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. I will fight for my son's innocence. You can count on that. The detective shrugged, seemingly unfazed. Suit yourself. Just know it's not going to be easy. As David and Tom stepped away from the detective, David's heart burned with determination. He wouldn't let his son's life be defined by this moment of injustice. We need to gather evidence, talk to witnesses, anything that can help Marcus, he said, his voice steady. Absolutely, Tom agreed, his expression resolute. We'll show them that they can't just bully your son. We'll fight this. With a renewed sense of purpose, David knew they had a long road ahead. But he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the love for his son and the desire to bring justice to his family. Together, they would uncover the truth and ensure that Marcus's story was heard. David Carter stood in his modest office, the walls adorned with photographs of civil rights marches and awards for his tireless advocacy. The soft hum of the overhead lights buzzed in the background, a stark contrast to the chaotic whirlpool of emotions churning within him. He had always known that the fight for justice was a marathon, not a sprint, but the sudden arrest of his son, Marcus, had thrust him into a new and terrifying race against time. His brow furrowed as he rifled through the files on his desk. There had to be something, any shred of evidence that could help prove Marcus's innocence. He picked up his phone and dialed a few numbers, reaching out to community members who might have witnessed the incident. He knew the importance of gathering testimonies. Every voice counted, every detail mattered. Hello, Mrs. Thompson. It's David Carter. I need your help, he said, his voice steady despite the anxiety that coiled within him. Did you happen to see what happened at the basketball court yesterday? On the other end, Mrs. Thompson's voice was shaky, yet resolute. I saw it, David. The officers were too quick to judge. They didn't even listen to the kids who were there. Thank you. That's exactly what I need, he replied, jotting down her words. Can you come by the office later? I want to gather everyone's accounts. As he ended the call, he felt a flicker of hope igniting within him. He wasn't fighting this battle alone. His community was rallying behind him, and together, they could challenge the narrative that had been imposed upon Marcus. Later that evening, the small conference room in his office overflowed with people. Neighbors, friends, and fellow activists filled the seats, their expressions a mix of determination and concern. David stood at the front, his heart swelling with gratitude at the sight of so many willing to stand against the tide of injustice. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice ringing with authority. We're here for Marcus. We know he's innocent, but we need to prove it. I want to hear from each of you about what you witnessed. One by one, they shared their accounts, recounting the day's events with vivid clarity. An elderly man, Mr. Jenkins, spoke up first. I was walking my dog when I saw those officers grab Marcus. He didn't do anything wrong, I swear it. A young woman chimed in, her voice trembling with emotion. I was playing with my little brother. We saw Marcus shooting hoops, and then suddenly, the officers were there, yelling at him. As the testimonies flowed, David took meticulous notes, piecing together a timeline of events. He could feel the weight of their collective resolve, a palpable force that fueled his determination. Thank you. We need to gather as many statements as possible, he urged. If anyone has any video footage or photographs from that day, please share them with me. The meeting ended with a renewed sense of purpose. As the crowd dispersed, David lingered in the room, staring out the window at the darkening sky. He knew the fight ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was ready to face them head-on. The following days were a blur of activity. David spent hours researching the legal framework surrounding wrongful arrests, poring over case files, and seeking out legal precedents that could bolster his son's case. He met with local leaders, garnering support and rallying the community to stand together. However, the town was divided. As whispers spread through the streets, some residents expressed support for David and Marcus, while others staunchly defended the officers, insisting that they were simply doing their jobs. Conversations in coffee shops and barbershops became battlegrounds of opinion, revealing the deep-seated prejudices that lingered beneath the surface. At a local diner one afternoon, David overheard a group of men discussing the situation. Their voices were low, but the disdain was unmistakable. "I don't care what anyone says. Those kids are trouble. They're always causing problems," one man scoffed, his voice dripping with prejudice. "Yeah, I saw that kid Marcus before. He's no angel," another chimed in. "No wonder the cops had to step in." David clenched his fists under the table, anger boiling within him. He wanted to confront them, to challenge their narrow-minded views, but he also understood that shouting would not change hearts. Instead, he resolved to continue his efforts to educate the community, to foster understanding and compassion. Back at home, he had a heart-to-heart with his wife, Linda. They sat on the porch, the night air cool against their skin as fireflies danced around them. "I'm worried about Marcus," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if this drags on? What if it changes him?" David took her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. "We'll make sure it doesn't. We'll show him that there's a community that believes in him, that loves him. He needs to know he's not alone." Linda nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I just wish it didn't have to be this way." The tension in the town escalated further when a local news station caught wind of the story. A reporter arrived at the diner, microphone in hand, eager to capture the division unfolding in the community. David watched from a distance as patrons expressed their views on camera, their words revealing the stark contrast between those who supported Marcus and those who believed the officers were justified in their actions. "Do you think Marcus is innocent?" the reporter asked a young woman, who hesitated before answering. "I want to believe he is," she said, her brow furrowed. "But it's hard. The police are supposed to protect us." As the broadcast aired, David felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew the power of media could sway public opinion, but he refused to let fear dictate his actions. Instead, he reached out to the local press, requesting an interview to share Marcus's story and advocate for justice. When the day of the interview arrived, David stood in front of the camera, the bright lights illuminating his face. He spoke passionately about the systemic issues plaguing the justice system, the biases that often led to wrongful arrests, and the urgent need for accountability. "Marcus is a good kid," he stated, his voice steady and unwavering. "He deserves to be treated with respect, just like anyone else. We must stand together against injustice, not only for Marcus, but for every child in this community who might be unfairly targeted." As the interview aired, the response was mixed. Some rallied behind David, while others doubled down on their support for the officers. But one thing became clear. The conversation had been ignited, and the community could no longer remain silent. Amid the turmoil, David received a tip about security footage from a nearby convenience store that had captured the moments leading up to Marcus's arrest. His heart raced as he absorbed the information. This could be the breakthrough he needed. He wasted no time. The following day, he visited the store, where the manager greeted him with a wary expression. "Mr. Carter, I've heard about your son," the manager said, his tone cautious. "I want to help, but I'm worried about any backlash." David nodded, understanding the fear that shadowed the community. "I appreciate your concern, but if the footage shows what I think it does, it could change everything for Marcus." With a reluctant sigh, the manager led David to the back office, where the surveillance system was set up. As the video played, David's heart raced. The screen flickered to life, revealing a clear view of the basketball court. He watched intently as Marcus was seen shooting hoops, laughing with his friends, completely oblivious to the chaos that was about to unfold. "Look!" David exclaimed, pointing to the screen. "That's him. He's nowhere near the robbery." The manager leaned closer, squinting at the footage. "You're right. This could be important." David felt a surge of adrenaline. "Can you provide a copy of this footage? It's crucial for my son's case." The manager hesitated, but then nodded. "I'll get it for you. Just promise to be careful. Things are tense around here." As David left the store, the weight of the world seemed to lift from his shoulders. He had a tangible piece of evidence that could exonerate Marcus. But he also understood that the fight was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, and he would have to navigate the treacherous waters of public opinion, prejudice, and the legal system itself. Driving home, he felt a glimmer of hope his heart pounding with renewed purpose. He couldn't wait to share the news with Marcus and Linda. As he entered the house, he found them in the living room, talking quietly. "Dad, how did it go?" Marcus asked, his eyes bright with curiosity. David smiled, feeling the warmth of his son's presence. "I think we found something that could help you. We've got security footage from the store that proves you were nowhere near the robbery." Marcus's eyes widened, a spark of hope igniting within him. "Really? That's amazing." Linda rushed over, wrapping her arms around both of them. "Oh, David, this is incredible news." David held them both close, feeling the strength of their bond. "We're not done yet, but this is a step in the right direction. We'll fight for your innocence, Marcus." Together, as they stood, embracing, the weight of the world still pressed down on David's shoulders. But in that moment, surrounded by his family, the day of Marcus's arraignment arrived with a heavy, oppressive atmosphere that seemed to settle over the small town like a thick fog. The sun shone brightly outside, but inside the courthouse, a palpable tension filled the air. Community members packed the courtroom, their faces a mix of concern and determination. Whispers circulated among the crowd, each person eager to catch a glimpse of Marcus, the young boy at the center of this storm. David Carter stood at the front of the courtroom, his heart pounding in his chest. He wore a crisp navy suit, the fabric slightly wrinkled from the stress of the past few days. His sharp, intelligent eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of supporters and those who still clung to the officer's narrative. He knew he had to present the video evidence effectively. It was the key to proving Marcus's innocence. As the judge entered the room, the chatter hushed. David straightened his posture, clenching the folder that held the crucial evidence. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, took her seat and looked down at the assembled crowd, her gaze piercing. "We are here today to address the charges against Marcus Carter," she announced, her voice echoing in the silence. "Mr. Carter, you may present your case." David stepped forward, his heart racing. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "My son, Marcus, has been wrongfully accused of a crime he did not commit. We have gathered evidence that will demonstrate his innocence." He gestured toward the screen set up in the courtroom, where the video footage was about to be displayed. The officers involved in Marcus's arrest, Officer Thompson and his partner, sat at the prosecution's table, their expressions hardening as David continued. As you can see from this footage, taken from a nearby store, Marcus was not anywhere near the scene of the robbery. David's fingers trembled slightly as he clicked play, the screen flickering to life. The footage showed a bustling street with people going about their daily lives. In the bottom corner of the screen, the timestamp indicated that it was the very moment the robbery had taken place. David held his breath as the image of Marcus appeared, dribbling a basketball with his friends just a few blocks away. The crowd in the courtroom leaned forward, some gasping in disbelief, while others exchanged bewildered glances. "Your Honor, this video clearly shows my son was with his friends, completely innocent, while the robbery occurred," David continued, his voice rising with conviction. Yet, despite this evidence, he was arrested without cause. The officers involved acted on their assumptions rather than facts. Officer Thompson shifted in his seat, casting a wary glance at his partner, who leaned in to whisper something. David noticed the exchange and pressed on. "This isn't just about Marcus. It's about the systemic issues that allow such injustices to occur. It's about the need for accountability and fairness in our legal system." The judge listened intently, her brow furrowing as David laid out the implications of the officer's actions. "This is a moment for our community to reflect on how we treat one another, especially our youth. Marcus deserves a fair chance, just like every other child in this town." As David spoke, Marcus sat in the defendant's chair, a mix of emotions swirling within him. He felt pride for his father's courage, yet overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation. He glanced at the crowd, spotting familiar faces among the sea of strangers: his mother, friends from school, and neighbors who had come to support him. Their presence bolstered him, giving him a sense of hope amidst the despair. Suddenly, Officer Thompson stood up, his voice cutting through the tension. "Your Honor, I object." This video is irrelevant to the case. It does not absolve the defendant of his involvement in suspicious activity. We had reasonable suspicion based on eyewitness reports. David's heart sank at the officer's words, but he refused to back down. With all due respect, officer, the video is not just relevant. It is conclusive evidence of my son's whereabouts. The so-called eyewitness reports were based on assumptions, not facts. It is our duty to seek the truth, not to further perpetuate a narrative built on bias. The judge nodded, considering the arguments. Officer Thompson, while I recognize the need for reasonable suspicion in law enforcement, it is crucial that such suspicions are backed by concrete evidence. I will review the video and the context surrounding the arrest before making a decision. As the judge turned her attention back to the screen, Marcus felt a surge of anxiety. The room was silent, the only sound being the faint hum of the projector. He could feel the weight of every gaze upon him, a mix of sympathy and judgment. He glanced over at his mother, who was seated in the front row, her expression a mixture of worry and resolve. She had always been his rock, and in this moment, he drew strength from her presence. Just then, the door at the back of the courtroom swung open, and in walked his mother, Lisa Carter. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red-rimmed, evidence of the sleepless night she had endured. The moment she spotted Marcus, her expression shifted from despair to fierce determination. She rushed forward, squeezing his hand tightly, grounding him in the chaos surrounding them. "Marcus, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm here. We'll get through this together." Marcus nodded, feeling a wave of comfort wash over him. "I'm scared, Mom," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I know, but your father is fighting for you. We believe in you, and that's what matters," she reassured him, her grip tightening. As the judge continued to examine the video, murmurs broke out among the spectators. Some whispered words of support for Marcus, while others exchanged skeptical glances at the officers. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly charged, and David knew they were at a critical juncture. After what felt like an eternity, the judge turned her attention back to the courtroom. "I appreciate the arguments from both sides. However, the evidence presented raises significant questions regarding the validity of the arrest. I will postpone this hearing to allow further investigation into the circumstances surrounding the case. We will reconvene next week." A mix of emotions surged through Marcus. Relief that the hearing was postponed, but also an undercurrent of despair at the uncertainty of the future. He couldn't help but feel that this battle was far from over. As the courtroom began to empty, David approached his son, a reassuring smile breaking through the tension. "Marcus," he said, kneeling beside the chair where his son sat today, "I know this is hard, but we're making progress. The truth is on our side, and we will prove your innocence." "I just want this to be over, Dad," Marcus replied, his voice trembling. "I don't want to feel like a criminal." David reached out, placing a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "You're not a criminal, Marcus. You're a good kid caught in a terrible situation. We will fight this together, and I promise you, we'll get through it." As they stood together, Marcus felt a flicker of hope igniting within him. The road ahead would be challenging, but with his father's unwavering support and his mother's love, he believed that perhaps they could overcome the injustice that had threatened to engulf their lives. The courtroom emptied out, leaving behind an air of uncertainty, but also a growing determination among those who believed in Marcus's innocence. Outside, the sun continued to shine, a stark contrast to the shadows lurking in the corners of the town's justice system. Marcus took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next, buoyed by the knowledge that he was not alone. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm, golden hue across the small town, David Carter stood on the steps of the community center, surveying the crowd that had gathered for the rally. The anxiety that knotted in his stomach was palpable, yet it was outweighed by a sense of determination. His son, Marcus, had been wrongfully accused, and David was resolute in his mission to shine a light on the injustices they were facing. The air was electric with anticipation. Banners bearing messages of solidarity and calls for justice waved in the gentle breeze. "Justice for Marcus and no more injustice," were scrawled in bold letters, echoing the sentiments of the community members who had come out to support Marcus and his family. David took a deep breath, reminding himself that this was about more than just his son. It was about standing up against a system that often turned a blind eye to the truth. As he prepared to speak, David glanced over at Marcus, who was standing a few feet away, flanked by his friends. The boy's face reflected a mix of pride, fear, and uncertainty. David's heart ached for him. He knew how much Marcus loved basketball, how he dreamed of playing professionally, and how this ordeal threatened to shatter those dreams. But today, amidst the rallying voices of the community, David hoped to instill a sense of hope in his son. "Dad, what if they don't believe us?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes searching for reassurance. David knelt beside him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "They will believe us, Marcus. We have the truth on our side. And look around you. This is just the beginning. You're not alone in this fight." Marcus nodded, though his expression remained troubled. David could sense the weight of the situation pressing down on him. As the rally commenced, several speakers took to the makeshift podium, sharing their own experiences with racial profiling and injustice. The crowd listened intently, their faces reflecting a mixture of anger and empathy. One woman, a local teacher named Ms. Harris, spoke passionately about the need for change in their community. "We cannot allow fear to silence us," she declared, her voice strong and unwavering. "Every day, families like Marcus's are torn apart by a system that fails to protect them. We must stand up and demand accountability." The crowd erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the streets. David's heart swelled with pride as he watched the community rally together, their voices rising in unison. This was what he had hoped for, a collective stand against injustice. When it was finally David's turn to speak, he stepped up to the microphone, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on him. He looked out at the faces in the crowd, each one filled with concern, compassion, and determination. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "As many of you know, my son Marcus is facing an unjust situation, one that no child should ever have to endure. This isn't just about him. It's about all of us. It's about our community and the values we stand for." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. "We are here to say that we will not stand idly by while our children are victimized by prejudice and discrimination. We must hold those in power accountable for their actions, no matter their badge or uniform. Justice is not a privilege for the few. It is a right for all." The crowd erupted in cheers, and David felt a renewed sense of purpose. He continued, "We have a responsibility to ensure that our community is a safe place for all its members, regardless of race, background, or circumstance. Let Marcus's story be a catalyst for change. Let it inspire us to dismantle the biases that have long plagued our society." As he spoke, David noticed a group of young people in the front row, some holding signs with Marcus's name emblazoned on them. Their faces were lit with hope, and he realized that this rally could be a turning point, not just for Marcus, but for the entire community. Together, we can create a future where our children can grow up without fear of unjust accusations. A future where they can pursue their dreams without the shadow of prejudice looming over them. But we must act now. We must raise our voices, stand together, and refuse to be silenced. The crowd responded with enthusiastic applause, their cheers reverberating through the air. Marcus stood a little taller, the weight of his anxiety lifting as he felt the support of those around him. David could see the flicker of hope in his son's eyes, and it filled him with determination. After his speech, David stepped down from the podium, greeted by the warm embrace of friends and allies. "You were amazing, David," one of his neighbors exclaimed, patting him on the back. "You really got through to everyone." "Thank you," David replied, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through him. "But this is just the beginning. We need to keep this momentum going." As the sun began to set, casting a fiery glow across the sky, the rally continued. People mingled, sharing stories, and discussing ways to push for change within their community. David felt a sense of camaraderie among them, a shared understanding that they were all fighting for something greater than themselves. Amidst the conversations, Marcus approached his father, a smile spreading across his face. "Dad, I think we can really make a difference. Look at everyone here." David nodded, feeling pride swell within him. "Yes, we can, Marcus. And it starts with us. Your voice matters. And together, we can create a future where no one has to face what you've gone through." As night fell, the rally transitioned into a candlelight vigil, symbolizing hope and unity. People lit candles, their flickering flames illuminating the darkness as they stood together in solidarity. David and Marcus joined the crowd, their hearts swelling with gratitude for the support surrounding them. "Do you remember when we used to light candles for those big games you played?" David asked, leaning down to speak to Marcus. "Yeah, we always believed in the magic of the moment," Marcus replied, his eyes reflecting the glow of the candles. "I feel that magic now, Dad. I really do." David smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "This is our moment, son. Together, we can turn this pain into purpose." The night air was filled with a sense of hope, unity, and determination. As David looked out at the sea of lights flickering in the darkness, he knew that the fight for justice was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, he felt an overwhelming sense of optimism. They were not alone in this battle. They had a community standing with them, ready to fight for what was right. As the rally came to an end, people began to disperse, but the energy lingered in the air. David and Marcus walked home together, their hearts lighter than they had been in weeks. They spoke of their hopes for the future, the changes they envisioned, and how they would continue to fight for justice, not just for Marcus, but for everyone who had suffered at the hands of prejudice. "Dad, I want to help," Marcus said, determination etched on his face. "I want to speak out and make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." David's heart swelled with pride. "You will, Marcus. Your voice is powerful, and together, we'll create the change we want to see." As they approached their home, the porch light flickered to life, welcoming them back. David knew the road ahead would be challenging, but with the support of their community and the love of his family, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The fight for justice was just beginning, and he was determined to see it through to the end. The courtroom was charged with a tense energy as the new hearing began. Families, friends, and community members filled the wooden benches, their expressions a mixture of hope and anxiety. David Carter stood at the front, his demeanor calm but determined. He glanced at Marcus, who sat at the plaintiff's table, his youthful face drawn tight with worry. David could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the stakes high not just for his son, but for the community that had rallied around them. "Your Honor," David began, his voice steady, "today I will present evidence that not only proves my son Marcus's innocence, but also sheds light on the prejudiced motivations of the officers involved in his wrongful arrest." He took a deep breath, feeling the eyes of the courtroom on him, before continuing. "I call my first witness to the stand." A hush fell over the room as a young woman named Jasmine approached the witness stand. She was a friend of Marcus's, a bright student known for her integrity. As she took her seat, David could see the nervousness in her hands, but he also noticed her determination to speak the truth. "Jasmine, can you tell the court what you witnessed on the day Marcus was arrested?" David asked gently. Jasmine cleared her throat, her voice trembling slightly as she began. "I was with Marcus and some friends playing basketball. We saw the police officers come up to him. They didn't ask any questions. They just grabbed him and accused him of robbery. I tried to explain that he was innocent, but they wouldn't listen." David nodded encouragingly. "And how did Marcus react?" "He was scared. He kept saying he didn't do anything wrong, but they just took him away," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "It was so unfair." "Thank you, Jasmine," David said softly, feeling a swell of pride at her courage. He turned to the judge. "I have no further questions." As Jasmine stepped down, the courtroom murmured with disbelief. David could sense the shift in the atmosphere. People were beginning to grasp the gravity of the situation. He called up several more witnesses, each sharing their accounts of the arrest and the officers' dismissive attitudes. An elderly man spoke about how he had seen Marcus playing basketball and how the young boy had been nothing but a role model for the neighborhood. A local shop owner corroborated that Marcus had been in his store buying snacks at the time of the alleged robbery. With each testimony, the narrative of Marcus as a troublemaker crumbled further. Finally, David prepared to present the most crucial piece of evidence. He felt a rush of adrenaline as he approached the judge's bench. "Your Honor, I would like to present a recorded conversation between the officers involved in my son's arrest. This evidence illustrates not just their misconduct, but their prejudiced motivations." The tension in the courtroom thickened as David played the recording. The voices of Officers Thompson and his partner crackled through the speaker, their words revealing a shocking disregard for justice. "Yeah, I just don't trust those kids around here," Officer Thompson's voice echoed. "They think they can get away with anything, right? They act like they own the place. We should show them who's really in charge," the partner replied, laughter lacing his tone. Gasps filled the courtroom. David could see the outrage in the faces of the community members. They had come to support Marcus, but now they were confronted with the raw truth of systemic prejudice. "This isn't just about my son," David said, addressing the judge and the audience. "This is about a culture of bias that exists within our law enforcement. This is about holding those in power accountable." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, the tension transforming into an overwhelming wave of anger and indignation. David stepped back, his heart racing as he watched the judge's expression shift. The judge, visibly disturbed, glanced at the officers, whose faces had turned a shade paler. "Officer Thompson, Officer Green," the judge said, his voice firm, "you are hereby suspended pending an investigation into your conduct." The courtroom exploded with applause and shouts of support for Marcus. David felt his heart swell with pride and relief. He turned to Marcus, who wore a look of disbelief mixed with hope. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the bond between father and son felt unbreakable. "Marcus, you did it," David whispered, a broad smile breaking across his face. "You stood strong." As the noise subsided, the judge banged his gavel for order. "We will reconvene to discuss the next steps regarding the charges against Marcus Carter. This court recognizes the injustice he has faced." With that, the courtroom began to empty, but the sense of unity and hope lingered in the air. David took a moment to thank Jasmine and the other witnesses, their courage shining like a beacon in the darkness. Outside the courthouse, the sun shone brightly, casting a warm glow on the gathering crowd. News reporters rushed to capture the moment, their cameras flashing as David and Marcus emerged together. The community had rallied around them, and now they stood united in their fight against injustice. "Dad, did we really win?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper as they stepped into the light. "Yes, son," David replied, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Today we took a huge step toward justice. This is just the beginning." As they made their way to the car, Marcus felt a sense of relief wash over him. The burden he had carried for so long was starting to lift. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we continue to fight. We'll make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. We'll work to change the system," David said, determination radiating from him. "We have to ensure that the voices of those who have been wronged are heard." "I want to help," Marcus declared, feeling a newfound strength within himself. "I want to speak out for kids like me." David smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "That's the spirit, Marcus. Together, we can make a difference." In the days that followed, the community continued to rally behind Marcus and David. News of the recorded conversation spread, igniting discussions about police accountability and community relations. David became a prominent voice in the movement for reform, advocating for training and policies to combat racial bias within law enforcement. Marcus, inspired by his father's passion, took to social media to share his story. He wrote about his experiences, urging others to stand up against injustice. His words resonated with many, and soon, he found himself at the forefront of youth activism in the town. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Marcus turned to his father, excitement in his eyes. "Dad, we should organize a community event, a place for everyone to come together and share their stories." David nodded thoughtfully. That's a brilliant idea, Marcus. Sharing our stories is powerful. It helps foster understanding and empathy. They began planning a community gathering, inviting speakers from various backgrounds to share their experiences with prejudice and injustice. The event would serve as a platform for healing and unity, a step toward bridging the divides that had plagued their town for too long. As the day of the event approached, anticipation filled the air. The community center was adorned with banners and posters, each telling a story of resilience and hope. People from all walks of life came together, their differences overshadowed by a shared commitment to justice. When Marcus took the stage, he looked out at the crowd, a mix of familiar faces and new ones. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Marcus Carter, and I'm here to tell you that our voices matter. We have the power to create change, to stand up for what is right. The crowd erupted in applause, their support ringing out like a chorus of hope. Marcus felt a surge of confidence as he spoke about his experiences, the pain of injustice, and the strength found in unity. He encouraged others to share their stories, fostering an atmosphere of openness and understanding. As the event unfolded, David watched with pride as his son inspired those around him. Together, they had turned their pain into a catalyst for change, igniting a movement that would resonate far beyond their small town. In the weeks and months that followed, their efforts bore fruit. Community leaders began to take notice, implementing training programs for officers and fostering dialogues between law enforcement and residents. The town slowly began to heal, the wounds of prejudice giving way to a newfound understanding. Marcus had transformed from a victim of injustice into a beacon of hope, and David found himself not just fighting for his son, but for a brighter future for all. Their journey had been fraught with challenges, but together, they stood as a testament to the power of resilience, love, and the unwavering pursuit of justice.